The night the fire came, the desert wind howled like a living thing. Flames danced across the dry grass, leaping from fence to fence, devouring everything in their path. The old rancher's land, his cattle, his barn, his life's work, was moments from turning to ash. But through the blaze rode a figure he hadn't expected, a young Apache maiden on a painted horse, her dark hair whipping in the wind like the storm itself. She carried water skins slung across her saddle, her eyes sharp and fearless. Without a word, she joined the fight against the flames. Together, they beat at the fire with wet blankets and shovels, their arms trembling from exhaustion. Hours later, when the last ember died, only smoke and silence remained. The ranch still stood, battered but alive. The cowboy turned to her, chest heaving, soot streaking his face. "You saved my ranch," he said, voice rough with awe. The girl looked at him, calm, proud, yet distant. "The fire was hungry," she replied softly. "It needed to be stopped." She turned to mount her horse, but he reached out and stopped her. "At least tell me your name." "Nida," she said, her voice like the whisper of the wind through canyon stone. And then she was gone, vanishing into the dark horizon. Days passed, but the cowboy couldn't forget her. He'd spent years fighting droughts, storms, and bandits, but he'd never met anyone like her, someone who faced danger with such grace. He tried to push her from his mind, but every time the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, he swore he heard her name in it. Then, one evening, he found her again. She stood by the river, filling her canteen. He approached quietly, tipping his hat. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said with a faint smile. Nida looked up, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "The land is wide," she replied. "But the wind carries stories. I heard yours." They talked for hours by the riverbank. He learned that her tribe had once lived near his ranch before the soldiers forced them into the mountains. Her family had been scattered, her people struggling to survive. She spoke of loss without bitterness, only a quiet strength that humbled him. When he offered her food and shelter, she hesitated. "Your people do not welcome mine," she said. "They call us thieves and savages." He looked her straight in the eyes. "Then they don't know you like I do." So she stayed. At first, she kept to herself, working silently beside him, mending fences, tending horses, gathering herbs from the hills. But slowly, the walls between them began to fall. He taught her to ride with a western saddle, she taught him the old Apache ways of reading the sky and listening to the earth. One night, as the sun sank behind the mesas, he watched her from the porch, her silhouette framed by the crimson light. "Nida," he said softly, "I owe you more than I can repay." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fire of the sunset. "You owe me nothing. The land gives and takes in its own time." He stepped closer. "Then let me give you what I can." Her breath caught, her hand tightening on the edge of her shawl. "What is it you wish to give, cowboy?" "My heart," he said simply. "You saved my ranch from burning that night, but I think you also saved me. Let me save yours, if you'll let me." For a long moment, she said nothing. The wind carried the scent of sage and smoke between them. Finally, she looked away. "My heart is not something that can be saved," she whispered. "It belongs to a people who have lost too much." He shook his head. "Maybe it just needs a place to rest." From that night on, their bond deepened, not through words, but through quiet understanding. They shared morning coffee under the pale dawn and laughter beneath the stars. The townsfolk whispered, calling her the Apache girl the cowboy couldn't forget, but he didn't care. He'd seen the truth behind her eyes, fire and kindness, wildness and grace. Then came the soldiers. They rode through the valley one afternoon, looking for runaway Indians. When they reached the ranch, their leader demanded to search the property. The cowboy stood his ground, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "Ain't no prisoners here," he said coldly. But they found Nida hiding behind the barn, her face pale with fear. "She's with me," the cowboy growled, stepping between them. "You'll have to shoot me first." The tension hung thick in the air. The soldiers hesitated, no one wanted a gunfight over one woman. Finally, the officer spat and motioned for his men to leave. "You'll regret this," he said before riding off. That night, Nida wept for the first time. "You risked everything," she whispered. He brushed a tear from her cheek. "You did the same for me once." Under the endless desert sky, they stood together, two souls from different worlds bound by courage and love. When he kissed her, it wasn't with possession or pride, but with promise. Months later, their ranch grew stronger than ever. Cattle grazed again, wildflowers returned to the burned pastures, and laughter echoed from the porch where once there had been only silence. Nida wore a simple silver band on her hand, his mother's ring, reshaped by the village smith. Sometimes, she still looked to the horizon, remembering the home she'd lost. But when he came beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, she knew she had found another. "You saved my ranch from fire," he murmured one evening as the stars blinked awake. "Now let me keep saving your heart, for as long as it beats next to mine." And beneath that wide, eternal sky, she finally smiled, not as the girl who had once ridden through flames, but as a woman who had found peace in the arms of the man who had seen her soul. Their story became a whisper carried by the desert wind, a tale of a cowboy and an Apache maiden, bound not by blood or land, but by love strong enough to outlive fire itself.